I am totally illiterate. Philosophy is easy. Anyone could do it. Totally illiterate. Here, I'll just read first. How about that? Okay. The front line that is violently inscribed between Platonism and its closest other in the form of I'm making sure I'm recording because I usually... Okay, I'm recording. Okay. The front line that is violently inscribed between Platonism and its closest other in the form of Sophistics is far from being unified, continuous, as if stretched between two homogeneous areas. Its design is such that, through a systematic indecision, the parties and the party lines frequently exchange their respective places, imitating the forms and barring the paths of the opponent. These permutations are therefore possible, and if they are obliged to inscribe themselves within some common territory, the dissension no doubt remains internal and casts into absolute shadow some entirely other of both Sophistics and Platonism, some resistance having no common denominator with this whole commutation. This is a good time to just do one short little riff or just one comment about, I'm going to be in a duel with the commenter again. When was the joy when I could just make a comment? Had comment like that? No, but it still goes. Okay. Shh. Okay, so Derrida is always, whenever there's two opposing groups, people have heard about how Derrida's difference shows how an opposition has a common origin or common originary root. In oppositional argumentation, like between, say, Sophists and Platonists, same deal. So like Sophists and Platonists share common, we'll put origin in quotes so we can talk about how it's not really an origin, but it's sharing. So it's an internal dispute. It's not an opposition that has rigorous inside outside, and then will end up probably not being an opposition in some fashion. This is another way of saying this is they're the same, but not identical. And when he's saying here, some resisting having no common denominator, there's some resistance. I suspect that the word for that is restance. It's like remainder, not resistance. And they just translate resistance. But either way, it's the same sort of thing. This is going to be Pharmakon. This is going to be the special sauce. When I started saying, somebody asked me at Derrida seminar, what is the phrase you use the most when explaining Derrida? And I said it's special sauce, which is, I don't know if it's my pedagogy or just, but Pharmakon is the special sauce. It's the mystery ingredient, or the dark precursor in Deleuze. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Does that make sense? Or is that... So just as we're going through the whole sophist versus philosophers thing, the Derridian point is like, they're going to both be drawing on a common root. And part of that is that we've started to read, knowledge, and we've started to read philosophy as pharmacons for your brain. This is your brain on philosophy, like the Nancy Reagan sort of thing. It's a healing cure for your brain. And there's going to be a Plato's pharmacy and a sophist pharmacy. And so it's not as if Plato is like on a war on drugs against the sophists too, right? And Derrida's point is going to be, thus, if that's true, then it also follows from that the sophists have an anti-pharmakon vibe too. And the sort of anti-pharmakon vibe of the sophists is something like Alex Jones. I was thinking about examples, but it's something like because the sophists always say, hey, decide for yourself, right? You don't need experts, right? You don't need scientists. You don't need something external to you. You don't need to go to philosophy school, right? And just your own independent, conscious, present to yourself thinking is enough. I go outside, I look at the frogs, they seem gay to me. That sort of Alex Jones perspective of having an easy access to truth, not needing expertise, not needing distance, not needing writing. Derrida's not going to sign up for that either, right? And he's navigating between these two oppositions, not signing up for either side of them. Okay, does that make sense? Is that helpful or I don't...
May I ask,
Yeah, please.
one thing I'm unclear about in this, he says these permutations are therefore possible, and if they are obliged to inscribe themselves within some common territory, the dissension no doubt remains internal and casts into absolute shadow some entirely other of both sophistics and Platonism. My question is he saying that, are we to read to you, do you read this as because they are obliged to inscribe themselves within some common territory, therefore?
No, it's a really good question, Paisley, because this is going to be a translation French issue, and it's
Yeah.
a common way that French phrasing, when translated, is weird. This if is not an if. Is not an if in a hypothetical. It's a and if is really given that, and given that they're obliged to inscribe themselves within some common territory. It's a way that French uses these constructions. I'm not looking at this in the French right now, obviously. Oh, open pop-up node. There we go. That's what we use from now on.
If I may, I don't think it's going to be purely a translation issue. Obviously, partially it will be, but the thing that I'm looking for is basically this phrase or this sentence I take to be very important because it sounds like a very clear phrasing of the transcendental argument of Derrida, basically. And I'm just trying to get clear because it sounds like he's saying basically that the empirical appearance or the trace or inscription of the fact that we're talking about is that Platonism and Sophistics show themselves to refer to some common territory. And the idea is that what we describe as the entirely other of both Sophistics and Platonism, or their dissension, this is just like the condition of possibility of that reference or inscription to some common territory. And I'm just trying to clarify how right basically I am in reading that as saying that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. Because I think you're right. The one thing I would say you said dissension, you put it into apposition with that. The dissension is in the zone of the common territory, right? So their dissension, that this is like Platonists versus
It would be their relation to each other
Sophists
as other
as
versus their
dissension.
relation to the absolutely other.
And then the absolute shadow, some entirely other, that's going to be Pharmakon land, or that's going to be the special sauce Derrida land. But
It would be our scope of analysis right now, correct?
we're trying to follow it. Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to trace and follow. Yeah, in the reading. Yeah, the reason, so it's not just a translation issue, but I just have often been, basically, I've very commonly asked exactly the question you just asked. And so that's why lights went off in my head of just what is the, because you're totally right. The status of this argument of what is so important, because it's like, what is the condition? Because it frames the whole discussion, right? The whole Derridian argumentation of what is the status of this quasi-transcendental field, and on which sort of what's founding it, etc. Yeah. Okay. Do you feel satisfied with that response, or is there something else that in it that still isn't clear, or that you would want to talk about?
I would only ask so the thing that, I guess the other part of this quote, some resistance having no common denominator with this whole commutation. The thing that I take to be important from this ending of this paragraph is more or less lays out the overall structure of a certain answer within German idealism to like the question of philosophy, or maybe Heideggerian would say like the history of philosophy as such. But the idea is that resistance is like the marker of necessity or of objectivity. So like the necessity to inscribe themselves within a common territory would be like the relative validity of identity within Derrida's structure, and the fact that they suppress this commonness, they cast into shadow the absolutely other of both Sophistics and Platonism. That would be like the necessity. Although we're giving a commentary about truth, the form of modified truth or objectivity to Derrida's analysis is just this resistance.
I didn't understand the last movement. I understood everything you said except the last movement of that.
In the same way that in scientific discourse, objectivity is based on what we cannot. In German idealism, there's a history of seeing the necessity of a representation as being its objectivity. The thing that makes something, my thought of something an object, is that I feel my lack of control over my thinking about it. So resistance.
No, I totally get it. Yeah, so yes, that's great. Okay, yeah, okay, yeah, okay. So yeah, so like it's like we see the distortions are in space, so we realize there's a black hole. So we cannot observe the black hole The only thing is I would just hesitate to inscribe that in a subject-object framework, not because yeah, sure, but you understand that this is just translating, but it's the same sort of thing, yeah, that there's something that exceeds this field because of the resistance. So I haven't looked at the fringe this moment. It could very well be the word resistance. It could also just be the word remainder. It could be the word restance. It could, but it doesn't really matter for what we're saying here. But no, it's totally, yes, it's totally correct that everything should be okay, and it's not. These distortions, this inability of this field of Platonists versus Sophists to stabilize itself, to be coherent, its limits to be decidable, that gets us to, oh, what's going on here? What's the special sauce? And I think that I'm ignorant of the analogous example in sort of German idealism or thinking, but it would be like, because the subject can't determine anything in a given context, that there is some object that exceeds it. Is that the sort of, or what is the analogy?
Yeah, like I can use a very quick,
Yeah.
concise example. The concise example is that in the first introduction to the Wissenschaftslehre, Fichte basically says that the problem of philosophy is to explain the feeling of necessity in our representations. So the fundamental divide that Fichte lays out is that we have representations in which we feel freedom and we have representations in which we feel necessity. And necessity just is the feeling of our inability to modify certain aspects of our representation.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, yeah.
And so that's why the thing that I'm like, the lights that are going off in my head in this passage are like, okay, this is why Derrida, despite deconstructing theories of truth, has a concept of truth or objectivity. This is where we find it, you know.
I think that like if we should hold that in reserve for when we get to the more truthy IDOS stuff, because I do think it's something I was thinking the other day about this actually. I pretty much, I'm as a very deconstructive sort of guy in how I think generally, and I was thinking, I use truth all the time. I use truth nonstop. I'm totally okay with truth. And I was thinking about in this investigation and getting to the end of Plato's Pharmacy, that's probably the place where truth is it's the most explicit 1v1 of Derrida versus truth out there. Definitely hold that in reserve, this thought of, how do we link this resistance or to truth? If truth is something that exceeds our ability to determine it in thought or in representation, does that mean this would be something like truth? Is am I translating what your question to?
Yeah, basically. I think that's more like apt. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we will hold that in reserve and come back to that for sure once we get to more truthy stuff. Okay, would you mind reading here or?
Oh, no, yeah.
Oh, Riki's sick. Riki's sick. No, that's okay. We got the Three Musketeers here. We're good to go. Okay.
Starting with contrary.
Yeah, please.
Contrary to what we have indicated earlier, there are also good reasons for thinking that the diatribe against writing is not aimed first and foremost at the Sophists. On the contrary, sometimes it seems to proceed from them. Isn't the stricture that one should exercise one's memory rather than entrust traces to an outside agency the imperious and classical recommendation of the Sophists? Plato would thus be appropriating here, once again, as he so often does, one of the Sophists' argumentations, and here again he will use it against them. And later on, after the royal judgment, Socrates' whole discourse, which we will take apart stitch by stitch, is woven out of is woven out of schemes and concepts that issue from sophistics. One must thus minutely recognize the crossing of the border, and be fully cognizant that this reading of Plato is at no time spurred on by some slogan or password of a back to the sophists nature. Thus, in both cases, on both sides, writing is considered suspicious and the alert exercise of memory prescribed. What Plato is attacking in sophistics, therefore, is not simply recourse to memory, but, within such recourse, the substitution of the mnemonic device for live memory, of the prosthesis for the organ, the perversion that consists of replacing a limb by a thing, here substituting the passive mechanical by heart for the active reanimation of knowledge, for its reproduction in the present. The boundary between inside and outside, living and non-living, separates not only speech from writing, but also memory as an unveiling, reproducing a presence from rememoration, as the mere repetition of a monument. Truth as distinct from its sign, being as distinct from types. The outside does not begin at the point where what we now call the psychic and the physical meet, but at the point where the mneme, instead of being present to itself in its life as a movement of truth, is supplanted by the archive, evicted by a sign of rememoration or of commemoration. The space of writing, space as writing, is opened up in the violent movement of this surrogation, in the difference between pneume and hypognosis. The outside is already within the work of memory. The evil slips in within the relation of memory to itself, in the general organization of the gnostic activity. Memory is finite by nature. Plato recognizes this in attributing life to it. As in the case of all living organisms, he assigns it, as we have seen, certain limits. A limitless memory would in any event be not memory, but infinite self-presence. Memory always, therefore, already needs signs in order to recall the non-present, with which it is necessarily in relation. The movement of dialectics bears witness to this. Memory is thus contaminated by its first substitute, gnosis. But what Plato dreams of is a memory with no sign, that is, with no supplement. A pneume with no gnosis, no Pharmakon. And this at the very moment and for the very reason that he calls dream the confusion between the hypothetical and the anhypothetical in the realm of mathematical intelligibility.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So these are some really intense argumentative pages. A few basic things. You're always really happy when the person underlining the PDF underlines well, and I think they underlined well here. Dream is always something when in Derrida to perk your ears up when he uses dream or talks about dreaming, because you can dream anything, right? And so the claim of Derrida is right. Just a priori, we're going to say in Derrida land. So we don't need to demonstrate this right now, but just to be aware of it. No presence except as illusory effect. It's all writing. It's all signs of signs, which means in the end there's no sign. Quasign, but that's something it's not important to get into right this moment. But you could still dream of, and so all memory would need memory is finite. It has by essence, right? So here he makes an argument that memory is finite by essence, or he says by nature. Same difference here. But one can, of course, dream of infinite memory. Western metaphysics can't have presence, but it can dream of having presence, right? It can dream of wanting it. It's a very kind of simple thing of it. And that's just, let's just try to unpack the argument here with memory. Because what can we say about it here? We know memory is finite, but why is memory finite? Why is memory finite? Memory is finite because memory necessarily involves recalling something not present. Just by definition, it has to have limits and a relation to what is not present. Does that make sense? Does that follow?
Yeah, at a very simple level, my thought is not a memory if it doesn't presuppose that the thing it's thinking of is not present. Because
Yeah, and this is all simple right now. This is all, yeah, so it is just,
Yeah.
it is, yeah, we need signs, okay. Because a sign is what stands in for what is not present. Okay. Yeah, I think that I'm getting excited about the stakes of it, but right now it's just a pretty simple argument, right? That God doesn't need memory, right? Because God was there, and God is similar to himself in all of his instantiations and remembers everything, right? But the sign is going to screw up memory. And And this will get us to truth, that basically just truth needs eidos, needs memory, needs signs, needs pharmakons. It's not quite so, they're not such separate levels like this, but this is how it's going to go, right? And this is how he's going to explain it. So I will just read this here. Why is the surrogate or supplement dangerous? It is not, so to speak, dangerous in itself, in that aspect of it that can present itself as a thing, as a being present. In that case, it would be reassuring. But here, the supplement is not a being. It is nevertheless not a simple non-being, either. It's sliding slid bit out of the simple alternative presence-absence. That is the danger. And that is what enables the type always to pass for the original. As soon as the supplementary outside is opened, its structure implies that the supplement itself can be typed, replaced by its double, and that a supplement to the supplement, a surrogate for the surrogate, is possible and necessary. Necessary because this movement is not a sensible empirical accident. It is linked to the ideality of the eidos, as the possibility of the repetition of the same. And writing appears to Plato, and after him to all philosophy, which as such is constituted in this gesture. Man, what a... Jeez. As that process of redoubling in which we are fatally entrained. The supplement of a supplement, the signifier, the representative of a representative. A series of whose first term, or rather whose first structure does not yet, but we will do it later, have to be kicked up and its irreducibility made apparent. Just kicked up, made to appear, made to... Okay, whatever, just don't know what just happened. The structure and history of phonetic writing have, of course, played a decisive role in the determination of writing as the doubling of a sign, the sign of a sign. So I think this is the first mention of phonetic writing we've had so far. Might be worth talking about that. Sign of a sign, the signifier of a phonic signifier. Well, the phonic signifier would remain in anti-proximity in the living presence of an imne or psuche. The graphic signifier, which reproduces it or imitates it, goes 1 degree further away, falls outside itself, entrains life out of itself, and puts it to sleep in the type of its double. Whence the Pharmakon's 2 misdeeds. It dulls the memory, and if it is of any assistance at all, it is not for the neme, but for hypomnesis. Instead of quickening life in the original, in person, the Pharmakon can at best only restore its monuments. It is a debilitating poison for memory, but a remedy or tonic for its external signs, its symptoms, with everything that this word can connote in Greek. An empirical, contingent, superficial event, generally a fall or collapse, distinguishing itself like an index from whatever it is pointing to. Your writing cures only the symptom, the king has already said, and it is from him that we know the unbridgeable difference between the essence of symptom and the essence of the signified, and that writing belongs to the order and exteriority of the symptom. And then, oh yeah, here, I'll just read up to catalogic, and then we can stop and recapitulate and rememorialize. Thus, even though writing is external to internal memory, even though hypomnesia is not in itself memory, it affects memory and hypnotizes it in its very inside. That is the effect of this Pharmakon. If it were purely external, writing would leave the intimacy or integrity of psychic memory untouched. And yet, just as Rousseau and Saussure will do in response to the same necessity, yet without discovering other relations between the intimacy and the alien, Plato maintains both the exteriority of writing and its power of maleficent penetration, its ability to affect or infect what lies deepest inside. The Pharmakon is that dangerous supplement that breaks into the very thing that would have liked to do without it, yet lets itself at once be breached, roughed up, fulfilled, and replaced, completed by the very trace through which the present increases itself in the act of disappearing. If, instead of meditating on the structure that makes such supplementarity possible, if above all, which is like what we're trying to do here, right? That's already because we're trying to figure out what is possible. Yeah, so asking the transcendental question, like Paisley had said. If above all, instead of meditating on the reduction by which Plato, Rousseau, Saussure try in vain to master with an odd kind of reasoning, one were to content oneself pointing to the logical contradiction, one would have to recognize here an instance of that kind of catalogic to which Freud turns in the Traumdeutung in order to illustrate the logic of dreams. In his attempt to arrange everything in his favor, the defendant piles up contradictory arguments. The kettle I'm returning to is brand new. The holes were already in it when you lent it to me. You never lent me a kettle anyway. Analogously, writing is rigorously exterior to and inferior to living memory and speech, which are therefore undamaged by it. Writing is harmful to them because it puts them to sleep and infects their way of life, which would otherwise remain intact. Anyway, if one is resorted to hypomnesia in writing at all, it is not for their intrinsic value, but because living memory is finite, it already has holes in it before writing ever comes to leave its traces. Writing has no effect on memory. Okay, this is a lot of stuff, but I want to get to the Freud thing. This is a very common way that this inside-outside logic is going to be parsed in any Derridian argument. This kettle thing, if people know about this kettle thing, this is a just common example that, not a common example, it's one example in Freud, but it's an example that Derrida is going to turn to illustrate when the force of desire maintains things in contradiction. So if we have force of desire against writing maintains multiple mutually contradictory arguments together in the same text. Okay. And in general, they have to do with how this internal external boundary is navigated by Plato. So, and this is like useful also for analyzing discourses of immigration or racism. If they're able to contaminate, the inside must not have been that great in the first place, or must not have been as secure in itself in the first place, or must not have been as different from the external as one thought it was in the first place, right? The sort of externality of writing can't survive all of these arguments existing in the same text. This Plato-Rousseau Saussure thing, not super. I've been talking about it with friends. I don't know how important Rousseau in the end actually is to Derrida. I actually think not super important. But all of them are going to maintain this sort of catalogic thing, right? And all of them are going to say writing can be externalized and also need writing, insofar as writing is sign of a sign, as we defined it earlier, right? Writing is not just paper and ink, even if that's the usual example, right? And the exemplary example. Phonic signifier stuff is not as important in this essay, and I think we don't necessarily need to go over that unless it's something people really want to talk about. But any other thoughts or questions or ideas from this passage or anything I said?
As far as the phonic signifier thing, in terms of respecting it, acknowledging it to dismiss it, it feels, would you say, right, that more or less the point of the phonic reference is that phonetic writing purports to represent itself as representing a non-writing form of representation, basically. Because it's just representation, or it's non-phonic reference to phonic representation, right?
Yeah, it tries to be purely phonic. This is okay. So fine, I won't just dismiss the fun. We'll talk a little bit about linguistics and if you've ever talked to somebody who is a linguistics person online, they are like the most terroristic sort of interlocutors I've ever encountered. I've never talked to somebody like I've talked to neo-Nazis who are more respectful than linguistics people are, like grad students, PhD people. It's unreal how hard these people are to talk to. And linguistics is the idea. And right, linguistics, just by the way, linguistics founded the social sciences, or it was the example of scienticity in what's called in French the human sciences. We say the social sciences in English, right? And its object was the phonic, so phonetics, basically the phoneme. And the idea is we can scientifically notate phonemes and study them and how they change, and that's our science. And language is not so hard to make a science of, right? So of grammatology, right? And so the phonic signifier and the phonocentrism stuff, this is going to be this is of grammatology and to a lesser extent, the voice and phenomena. But the grammatology, this word is like, it is a science of writing grammae possible. Spoilers, no. at least given a current concept of science. So in the Bataille essay, which I know you know well, basically Derrida is excited about a different concept of science in that essay. Okay, anyway, back to the science in Bataille essay. So a phoneme has been something that seems so present, and it has been, and doesn't just seem that way, has been treated that way to found the science of linguistics. And if you talk, there's this guy on YouTube that I want to do a video making fun of it, but I don't know. He's I don't know. He's this guy who, I'm just too good natured, but he's this guy who he's a linguistics accent coach basically, and he claims he can do any accent on Earth. Why? Because linguistics has discovered all of the sounds all the sounds the human vocal cords can make, like all of them, and he has learned them all. And so it's just a matter of him writing down, or not even writing down. He doesn't even need to, I did said that in my head. He doesn't even say it's right down. He says he can just do any accent, period, because the phonemes are present to him. And so in the West, so that's linguistics, and in the linguistics, and that sort of found, and so Derrida's claim basically is in the context of linguistics, if in fact phonemes are not present to themselves or to us, if in fact gaps are necessary for speech and for writing. So traditionally people think, oh, gaps are, you have gaps in writing and stuff, but when you're talking, there's no pausing. Of course, this is not the case. Of course, talking, you need a duration, you need an extension of time, and you have pauses and different cadence, etc., right? French people love to say, we have a very musical language. And that music, that beat structure is a periodization and pattern of spacing. It's also true in English. It's true in any language. You need gaps, and you need and for writing, it's obvious. Like if you just had a blank page, if you just had a blank page or a just all black page, you can't read any of them. You need absence and presence. You need a gap and a present entity in order to read it. And the reason I say so-called is just the difference without positive term. So-called present. A we know is a because it's not all other 25 letters. So it's absent because it's present because it's absent. This is basically dialectically understandable argument, but going very fast. But the structure of phonetic writing is, so Derrida's going to say all forms of writing are graphic. Writing by definition is graphic, but something about how phonetic writing works and how it has been treated by the Western tradition has made it feel more auto-affecting, feel more presency than other forms of writing. This is just this language of phonocentrism. So here, does that clarify it enough, or it's a very scattershot explanation? But does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. One of the other things I would point out is when he was talking about, not to go back too far, but when he was talking about what was it? If memory was infinite.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to that. I have written down here, and I want to see what you think about this, that dreaming is the mode of apprehension of non-knowledge, because the dream itself is the miming of absolute knowledge, in that it wants to pin down the relation between the sign and memory, like a firm, one is over here, the other is over there. But it can't constitute itself independent of memory, because dreaming just is the traces of memory in sleep, right? So it suggests a necessary reference to what is outside of the dream while overcoming the logic of what is outside of the dream. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
It reminds me very much of Kant's discussion of intellectual intuition. The idea of contrasting memory is finite by nature. If memory was infinite, then it could have infinite self-presence, but because it's not, therefore we do not have presence of the object, which would be Kant's language. But yeah, you see the homology.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. No, that all sounds right to me. I think the one narrow thing I would just say is that the dreaming here is this is such a stupid comment in response to what you said. That was so smart, but just the dreaming is not any necessarily related to sleep in any essential way. Here it's just dreaming as it'd be interesting to clarify exactly what it is, but it's just I'm thinking of a Western metaphysics Christmas. Okay. I'm thinking of a presence, I'm thinking of an infinite memory, I'm thinking of no Pharmakon, and I'm dreaming of it. I think it will be great. There's no it is of the essence of the Pharmakon that it gives us also the ability, and of the essence of writing, that it can always run on empty. You can always just dream of something that's not there, dream of something that's not possible, including dream of presence, right?
Yeah, I'm just taking the analogy here more or less to say that the way that he's talking about dreams is, but we can dream, we are allowed to dream. So in the Kantian analogy, I'm taking dream to be like the Derridian translation of the type of metaphysics that's allowed after the critique of pure reason, because he's like laying out the sense in which it has necessity, because it's very similar to the sense in which Kant is defensive about himself. I'm critiquing pure reason, I'm pointing out the essential finitude. I'm pointing out that memory isn't infinite, but we can at least dream of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. I think it's not quite analogous here in the sense that here it's like a bad dream. Like it's like in the sense of Derrida, this is like the operation of desire of Western metaphysics that Derrida's trying to expose as just a dream. If it's saying if Hegel would not be okay with absolute knowledge being just a dream, right?
It would be why it's like an inversion of Platonism or like an infection of metaphysics.
Yeah, I like infection better than inversion for reasons I'm sure you can predict. But yeah, yeah. So it's because Derrida's got to show that Plato is reliant on writing on Pharmakon, on the special sauce of deconstruction, deconstructive virus logic, but is also a war on drugs, is also anti-sign, is also, and the way that can be, both of those things can be true, is that there's a gap between what the Platonic text dreams of and what it actually does. So what it says and what it does. Deconstruction is always about this. Deconstruction is always about this difference between what a text does and what it says. So it could be like what a text does and what it dreams it is doing or wants to do. That's the only that's so it's there's and Derrida's not against dreaming, but it's just this dream is not a good this dream of Western metaphysics has is fraught. Let's say it's fraught. Uh, okay, should we move on, or is that okay? I read less last. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think right here.
The opposition between neme and hyponesis would thus preside over the meaning of writing. This opposition will appear to us to form a system with all the great structural oppositions of Platonism. What is played out at the boundary line between these two concepts is consequently something like the major decision of philosophy, the one though through which it institutes itself, maintains itself, and contains its adverse deeps. Nevertheless, between neme
It's translation.
translation,
I
yes, translation.
Okay, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. Nevertheless, between neme and hyponesis, between memory and its supplement, the line is more than subtle. It is hardly perceptible. On both sides of that line, it is a question of repetition. Live memory repeats the presence of the eidos, and truth is also the possibility of repetition through recall. Truth unveils the eidos or the ontos on. In other words, that which can be imitated, reproduced, repeated in its identity. But in the anamnesic movement of truth, what is repeated must present itself as such, as what it is in repetition. The true is repeated. It is what is repeated in the repetition, what is represented and present in the representation. It is not the repeater in the repetition, nor the signifier in the signification. The true is the presence of the eidos signified. I just want to point out that is signifier here. Maybe this is a French issue. Maybe this is a translation issue. I want to clarify because in English that is ambiguous because signifier could be used to refer to an individual like object, like a sign, Or it could be you could be referring to the subject of signification, like me, I am signifying, right?
I
Do
don't
you know if
really, I think it would, it, I don't think the personal
okay.
attribution is a
If it's just
common,
if it's just not there, then that's okay.
I think it's a really hilarious idea in the sense of who is the signifier. I'm going to say this all the time now, but I just, it's like a,
Very deconstruction thing to ask. Like
who's the signifier? I'm signifying here. I'm signifying. So it's awesome. I think that it's not a traditional, to my ear, that's not a possible reading of the word.
got it.
But yeah, okay.
Then of hyponesia, as well as dialectics, the deployment of anamnesia, both presuppose the possibility of repetition. But sophistics this time keeps to the other side, to the other face, as it were, of repetition and of signification. What is repeated is the repeater, the imitator, the signifier, the representative, in the absence, as it happens, of the thing itself, which these appear to. I almost read that as Reddit. Which these.
Reddit, Reddit's here, baby. Yeah, fuck yeah.
Which the. Which these appear to re-edit. And without psychic or mnesic animation, without the living tension of dialectics. Writing would indeed be the signifier's capacity to repeat itself by itself, mechanically, without a living soul to sustain or attend it in its repetition. That is to say, without truth's presenting itself anywhere. Sophistics, hypomnesia, and writing would thus only be separated from philosophy, dialectics, anamnesis, and living speech by the invisible, almost non-existent thickness of that leaf between the signifier and the signified. The leaf, a significant metaphor we should note, or rather one taken from the signifier face of things, since the leaf with its recto and verso first appears as a surface and support for writing. But by the same token, doesn't the unity of this leaf, of the system of this difference between signified and signifier, also point to the inseparability of sophistics and philosophy? The difference between signifier and signified is no doubt the governing pattern within which Platonism institutes itself and determines its opposition to sophistics. In being inaugurated in this manner, philosophy and dialectics are determined in the act of determining their other. That's pretty dialectical of him to say, I'll be honest.
Oh yeah, yeah. So this is like this is actually pretty, in a certain way, familiar argumentation, I would feel, for you and for like people who, for anyone who has been dialectically brain upgraded. But
It's like a very simple two sides of coin argument, like what the difference between the two sides of the coin and like the surface of the edge between the two sides of the coin.
yeah, I don't mind translating it to that. Here, I think that as long as we, the sort of gap between the two sides is a, there's not a substance to it, or a sort of, that's it. We at least leave that blank for how to think it. It's certainly the two sides of the same coin is a sort of general, that's how we're going through all of, I feel a sort of hesitation of absorbing it, that metaphor, but I don't know why I feel that hesitation.
Is it the sameness of the coin? Because I'm pointing out, he says the thickness of the leaf between the signified and the signifier. The clarification I feel would be that the thickness of the coin indicates that the sameness, quote unquote, is merely an effect of the difference between the two surfaces, right? And that's why it's being described as thickness.
Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah,
I think he's saying fly.
no, but yeah, but it's close enough. I don't know why I was so hesitant. It's fine. It's, yeah, it is two sides to say. I don't think it's wrong.
I think it is insightful, your hesitancy. Technically speaking, the distinction between your emphasis on, or Derrida's emphasis on thickness and my emphasis on two sides of the same coin, that difference is itself the difference between signifier and signified, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's, there's probably an upshot to it. I think in reading this, you could get along with it. Either way, it's, at least I'm happy we talked through it. But yeah, this signifier signified difference is it's always going to be, these two terms are always exchangeable, right? Like signifier and signified always can switch places, and they're almost the same thing, right? And so it's there's a thickness to it, but a non-thickness to, it's like a very, it's a not locatable limit, right? And the fact that it's not locatable is why Platonism is possible, is why philosophy is possible. If it were locatable,
Well, it's like pointing out that surfaces themselves aren't thick. Thickness is just the relation between the surfaces.
yeah, absolutely. I think that this recto and verso stuff is like, Derrida has this great book called The Postcard. It's really good, but a bunch of it is like reading Derrida's love letters. He just put a bunch of his love letters in it, and it's really, and Derrida's love letters sound exactly as you would imagine his love letters would sound. Like it's like him. It's just Derrida doesn't have another character. Like he is just Derrida all the time, and that's such a mean thing to say. I don't know if I retract it, but it's he hasn't quite a signature there. And he got obsessed with this postcard. He's obsessed with postcards and the as a sign of signs, basically, and having a front and back. And we don't need to get into it now. I couldn't even summarize the argument that well, but made me think of it. Okay, I will get us to keep going. Okay.
Happy to if you like.
What did you say? Sorry.
I'm happy to read if you like.
Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
This profound complicity in the break has a first consequence. The argumentation against writing in the Phaedrus is able to borrow all its resources from a Socrates or Alcidamas. At the moment it turns their own weapons, transposing them against the Sophists. Plato imitates the imitators in order to restore the truth of what they imitate, namely truth itself. Indeed, only truth as the presence ousia of the present on is here discriminative, and its power to discriminate, which commands, or as you will, is commanded by the difference between signified and signifier, in any case remains systematically inseparable from that difference. And this discrimination itself becomes so subtle that eventually it separates nothing in the final analysis but the same from itself, from its
No, it's
And
okay.
this discrimination itself becomes so subtle that eventually it separates nothing in the final analysis but the same from itself, from its perfect, almost indistinguishable double. This is a movement that produces itself entirely within the structure of ambiguity and reversibility of the Pharmakon.
Okay, so we might just here. I'll read this next part. It's more of this Sophists versus Plato. Hey, it's the Spider-Man meme of Spider-Man pointing to himself. Hey, the dialecticians are also the simulator simulacrum people. Until I see something that's not absorbed by this, I'll just go through here. So I'll read this next part. And please feel free, anyone, to stop me or interrupt me if you have questions or anything at all at any time. Goes for always, or if you want to read and you haven't read, or you don't want to read, or you want to call the police, whatever you want to do. How indeed does the dialectician simulate him whom he denounces as a simulacrum, as the simulacrum man's? I really like that. Let's add. On the other hand, the Sophists advised, as does Plato, the exercise of memory. But, as we have seen, it was in order to enable themselves to speak without knowing, to recite without judgment, without regard for truth, in order to give signs. So, like, Sophists only remember their rhetorical tricks that they repeat, or their signs of expertise or signs of ability to look intelligent or knowledgeable, or rather in order to sell them. Through this economy of signs, the Sophists are indisputably men of writing. At the moment they are protesting, they are not. But isn't Plato one too, through a symmetrical effect of reversal? Not only because he is actually a writer, up in all argument we will specify later on, and cannot, whether de facto or de jure, explain what dialectics is without recourse to writing, not only because he judges that the repetition of the same is necessary in anamnesis, but also because he judges it indispensable as an inscription in the type. It is notable that tupos applies with equal pertinence to the graphic impression and to the eidos as model. Among many other examples, cf. Republic for a 2D. This necessity belongs to the order of the law and is posited by the laws. In this instance, the immutable, petrified identity of writing is not simply added to the signified law, a prescribed rule like a mute, stupid simulacrum. It assures the law's permanence identity with the vigilance of a guardian. As another sort of guardian of the laws, writing guarantees the means of returning at will, as often as necessary, to the ideal object called the law. We can thus scrutinize it, question it, consult it, make it talk, without altering its identity. All this even in the same words, nobly, boethia, is the other side exactly opposite of Socrates' speech in the Phaedrus. Okay. And, mark you, such argument will be a most valuable aid to intelligent legislation, because legal prescriptions, once put into writing, remain always on record as though to challenge the question of all time to come. Hence we need feel no dismay if they should be difficult on a first hearing, since even the dull student may return to them for reiterated scrutiny. Nor does their length, provided they are beneficial, make it less irrational than it is impious. In my opinion, at least, for any man to refuse such discourse his heartiest support. I am still quoted for an authorized translation, including the Greek where pertinent, and leaving the reader to appreciate the usual effects of translators on the relation between. Okay, as protasgamatomy. Prescriptions, okay. I see. Okay, you gotta write the law down. The legislator is a writer, and the judge a reader. Okay. Okay, any thoughts or questions on what we've just read here? This seems to be basically the argument we've been developing, so I feel like we can go a little faster here. But if I'm going too fast or there's stuff you want to talk about, please let me know. No? Okay. Yeah, all right. The italicized Greek words amply demonstrate it. The prostagmata of the law can be posited only in writing. In grammaci tetenta. Namastasia is ingrammatical. The legislator is a writer and there's a reader. Let's skip to book 12. He who would show himself a righteously equal judge must keep these matters before his eyes. He must procure books, grammata on the subject, and must make them his study. There is, in truth, no study whatsoever so potent as this of law, if the law be what it should be, to make a better man of its student. Inversely, symmetrically, the rhetors had not waited around for Plato in order to translate writing into judgment. For Isocrates, for Alcidamas, logos was also a living thing, zoo. This vigor, richness, agility, and flexibility were limited and not constrained by the cadaverous rigidity of the written sign. The type does not adapt to the changing given to the present situation, to what is unique and irreplaceable about it each time with all the subtlety required. While presence is the general form of what is, the present, for its part, is always different. But writing, in that it repeats itself and remained identical in the type, cannot flex itself in all senses, cannot bend with all the differences among presents, with all the variable, fluid, furtive necessities of psychagogy. He who speaks, in contrast, is not controlled by any pre-established pattern. He is better able to conduct his signs. He is there to accentuate them, inflect them, retain them, or set them loose according to the demands of the moment, the nature of the desired effect, the hold he has on the listener. In attending his signs in their operation, he who acts by vocal means penetrates more easily into the soul of his disciple. It's always about penetrating souls in Persuasion for Plato, producing effects that are always unique, leading the disciple, as though lodged within him, to the intended goal. It is thus not... it's an impregnation. It is that... No, what... Okay. Why do I generate images so quickly? There you go. It is thus not in its pernicious violence, but its breathless impotence that the sophist held against writing. It doesn't penetrate well enough, right? So writing is not penetrating enough for the sophist. I think I must have said this riff already, but this is also Hitler's argument against writing, by the way. Hitler thinks that, like, the reason why Nazism beats communism is that communists have pamphlets, whereas Nazis have speeches, and speeches can adjust to a crowd. And that's how he sees his own sort of speaking ability, and Nazism will defeat communism because, at least in the German context, because of speech being better than writing. So the inheritance goes really deep of Plato, right? In contrast, and I think that's something that Hitler, even without ever really reading Plato, you inherit that sort of imaginary and that sort of logic just from speaking a Western language. Even if he never read Plato, he read plenty of people who read Plato. He spoke in terms of Plato, right? So he's inherited this structure. And so deconstructing Nazism also, I think, starts with Derridian intervention, in my view. In contrast to this blind servant with its haphazard, clumsy movements, the writing, the Attic school, Gorgias, Isocrates, Academus, extolled the force of living Logos, the zoo, the great master, the great power, Logos dynastes megas estin, says Gorgias in his encomium of Helen. We'll edit that out. The dynasty of speech may be just as violent as that of writing, but its infiltration is more profound, more penetrating, more diverse, more assured. The only ones who take refuge in writing are those who are no better speakers than the man in the street. Avidamas recalls this in his treatise on those right speeches and on the Sophists. Writing is considered a consolation, a compensation, a remedy for sickly speech. Basically, we're going through this bit, the sophist relation to writing here. So we've got the sort of Spider-Man meme argument, right? We have both sophists and Plato have a parasitic relation to writing, have a relation to writing that is going to have some preference for speech in their own different ways. So if we have a sort of Alex Jones way on the side of sophists of you can reason it yourself, you can figure it out yourself, you don't need experts, you don't need writing, versus a basically endorsement of memory and or an endorsement of good memory versus bad memory and an inability to distinguish rigorously between good memory and bad memory. Yeah, would someone mind reading this next part, please?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Despite these similarities, the condemnation of writing is not engaged in the same way by the rhetors as it is in the Phaedrus. If the written word is scorned, it is not as a Pharmakon coming to corrupt memory and truth. It is because Logos is a more effective Pharmakon. This is what Gorgias calls it. As a Pharmakon, Logos is at once good and bad. It is not at the outset governed exclusively by goodness or truth. It is only within this ambivalence and this mysterious indetermination of Logos, and after these have been recognized, that Gorgias determines truth as a world, a structure or order, the counterpart cosmos of Logos. In so doing, he no doubt prefigures the Platonic gesture. But before such a determination, we are in the ambivalent, indeterminate space of the Pharmakon, of that which in Logos remains potency, potentiality, and is not yet the transparent language of knowledge. If one were justified in trying to capture it in categories that are subsequent to and dependent upon the history thus opened up, categories arising precisely in the aftermath of decision, one would have to speak of the irrationality of living Logos, of its spellbinding powers of enchantment, mesmerizing fascination, and alchemical transformation, which make it kin to witchcraft and magic. Sorcery, goetia, psychagogy, such are the facts and acts of speech, the most fearsome of pharmaca. In his Encomium of Helen, Gorgias used these very words to qualify the power of speech. Sacred incantations sung with words are bearers of pleasure and banishers of pain, for, merging with opinion in the soul, the power of incantation is wont to beguile it, and persuade it and alter it by witchcraft. There have been discovered two arts of witchcraft and magic. One consists of errors of soul and the other of deceptions of opinions. What cause, then, prevents the conclusion that Helen similarly, against her will, might have come under the influence of speech, just as if ravished by the force of the mighty? For speech constrained the soul, persuading it which it persuaded, both to believe the things said and to approve the things done. The persuader, like a constrainer, does the wrong, and the persuaded, like the constrained, in speech is wrongly charged. Persuasive eloquence is the power to break in, to carry off, to seduce internally, to ravish invisibly. It is furtive force per se. But in showing that Helen gave in to the violence of speech, would she have yielded to a letter? In disculpating this victim, Gorgias indicts Logos in its capacity to lie. By introducing some reasoning into speech, he wishes to free the accused of blame, and having reproved her detractors as prevaricators and proved the truth, to free her from their ignorance.
Okay, yeah, do you want to keep going? This is cool. We're getting to big zoo time.
But before being reined in and tamed by the cosmos and order of truth, Logos is a wild creature, an ambiguous animality. Its magical pharmaceutical force derives from this ambivalence, which explains the disproportion between the strength of that force and the inconsiderable thing speech seems to be. But if it was speech which persuaded her and deceived her heart, not even to this is it difficult to make an answer and to banish blame as follows. Speech is a powerful word by which by means of the finest and most invisible body effect the divinest words. It can stop fear and banish grief and create joy and nurture pity. Such persuasion entering the soul through speech is indeed a Pharmakon, and that is precisely what Porges calls it. The effect of speech upon the condition of the soul is comparable to the power of drugs.
Sorry, just slow played this, right? I buried the lead a little bit, in my opinion. Sorry, go ahead. It's like,
For just as the nature of drugs For different drugs dispel different secretions from the body. Some bring an end to disease and others to life. So also in the case of speeches, some distress, others delight, some cause fear, others make the hearers bold, and some drug and bewitch the soul with a kind of evil persuasion. The reader will have paused to reflect that the relation, the analogy, between the logos soul relation and the pharmakon body relation is itself designated by the term logos. The name of the relation is the same as that of one of its terms. The pharmakon is comprehended in the structure of logos. This comprehension is an act of both domination and decision.
Thank you so much, Paisley, for reading that. This is argumentatively, this is very cool. And I'd want to hear any reactions people have. But it's pretty much what we've been developing. It's a very, we have this long footnote that I want to, we have to talk. But there are a few footnotes in here that are Derrida's, and mostly they're translators. That's a good one that's Derrida's. But we're very much just developing this. Hey, even in Sophist land, because Derrida's not pro-sophist, right? Sophists are anti-writing too, as we've been saying. And designating how sophists are anti-writing, what the structure of that is the concern here. And the fact that the sophists see themselves as, and anyone who speaks, anyone who acts as a rhetorician is a drug dealer in a certain way, is a pharmakon dealer, persuasive eloquences. And the Pharmakon has a few different things that we want to outline that are, at least we're saying, we have this penetrative aspect, so inside, outside, traversed into the soul. The soul is the most internal internality you can have, right? And their drugs, these are just like spoken logoi here. Spoken logoi are pharmaka for sophists. And we're talking about the gorgai. We're talking about not the gorgias, but we're talking about gorgias encomium. I forgot, I can't say this word. Yeah, encomium. Helen, yes, encomium of Helen. It's not a text I've read, and I don't know what encomium means. Something I'm going to look up after this edict. But spoken logi are pharmaka for sophists, and sophists have the same, I'm going to do little scare quotes, but it is basically the same anti-pharmakon bias. I hesitate to use the word bias, desire that Platonism has. It's two sides of the same coin, one could even say. Okay. And so it's a drug in that it affects, right? So what is the drugginess of this, right? So the key point about here, the drugginess is the effect is completely indeterminate. It's wild card, right? That's why it's druggy. Okay. So, because he says it's the same, it's comparable for this reason, right? So the drug analogy is effect is indeterminate, unpredictable, up to and including witchcraft, right? Sort of corruption of the soul. Okay, so this is going to be exciting, but yeah, I think so. Anything else from the end of the section jumps out to people, or anyone wants to talk about?
Definitely the thing that jumps out to me, the two things are when he brings up and italicizes the word world, and when he says that the very last thing right before Pharmakeus, where he says that the relation between logos and its other is designated by logos itself.
Yeah.
So the reason those two things are super important to me is because while yes, definitely like the wild card or unpredictability element is certainly important, to me it's important that is like more, it feels an effect of the indeterminacy. And so when I read this passage, especially with the concept of world back into the history of metaphysics, it feels like we're giving a version of the insight that the like you mentioned the indeterminacy, and basically the indeterminacy is the ground of the construction of the world. That's what it feels like. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
We're more or less saying that indeterminacy is the ground of determinability, right?
totally. So here in the Gorgias land, we have in this Gorgias. So I haven't read Encomium of Helen, not a Gorgias expert, but in this text, based on what Derrida is saying, Logos is still in mystical Pharmakon land. And world is order, structure. Logos isn't yet purified into transparency, self-presence of truth. So that's what Platonism tries to do, right? So Platonism will fatherize, purify, transparentify Logos. And so when Derrida says determines truth as a world, a structure or order, the counterpart of Logos, um, it's we have this is like a Logos that is not yet what will be the what Logos will be in logocentrism, right?
I feel like
Yeah.
this gets very much at what I was talking about with the truth concept, the idea of a new version of truth, because what it feels like we're pointing out is that if Platonism will fatherize, purify, transparentify logos, that I take to be a form of production of logos qua identity. And what we're pointing out is that logos also designates the recognition that identity is a product of differentiation. Differentiation in this case between determinacy and indeterminacy.
Yeah, I think that we're definitely like getting to a sort of almost this is like a Heidegger style moment, right? Of hey, a little
Yeah,
earlier.
it's very ontological difference coded.
Yeah. It's, hey, a little earlier, there wasn't this determination, right? So it's like it's hey. So when he says that, in so doing, he no doubt prefigures the Platonic gesture. So he's Heidegger. I don't know if I want to say it at his best, but okay, Heidegger at his best moments are usually when he's trying to find a sort of earlier, prior to a decision, prior to a determination sort of division. And here, and this is a part of the text I'd never remember. I'm really happy we're going through it because I have no memory of this, as it were. This is a logos prior to logocentrism, prior to the Platonic gesture. Because we've been saying over and over, we're not pro-sophists, but this is in a sophist reading a sort of, I would say, cooler logos than we're going to get, if that makes sense. And so,
I
yeah.
think that also goes back to something you said earlier about how sophists only remember repetitions. And I was thinking of that, and I have here in like my notes, if sophists only remember repetitions, what is the condition of possibility of pure repetition? Repetition implies an originary common relation shared by Platonism and Sophism. And in this case, he's saying, but before such a determination, we are in the ambivalent, indeterminate space of the Pharmakon. And by denouncing sophists as only remembering repetitions, it's like a failure to acknowledge that if you use the good repetition, that implies that there was some originary source, whether it be conceived as logical material or otherwise, of the repetition that you think sophists are restricting themselves to. Does that make sense?
So I've almost grasped it. Could you say a little bit more about, I think just earlier we had said, sophists charge against the sophists, right? They just repeat their rhetorical tricks, right? Which are empty, contentless, truthless.
They're repetitions
Yeah,
of repetition.
yeah, repetitions of repetitions, right? These are super empty signs, right? Okay, then starting from that place in the argument, then where do you go here?
The point is that what this claim implies is that the Platonist position is repetitions of non-repetitions, and the Derridian move is just to point out that by denouncing sophists as repetitions of repetitions, you deny the possibility of repetition appearing within your own discourse in relation to non-repetition.
Exactly. No, totally. Yeah, there's going to be collateral damage, absolutely, inevitably. Not even collateral. The decision of Platonism is against is
And the possibility of collateral damage is just the common source.
exactly, yes, exactly, yes. So the decision of Platonism wants to be against bad repetitions, right? It wants to be just We're against sophists, we're against empty repetitions, we're against signs, but inevitably, common source, common origin, Pharmakon, special sauce, possibility of repetition, possibility of inscription, possibility of writing.
If you negate all those, you negate the Platonist.
Yeah. You can't have one without the other, basically. Just you can't have your cake and eat it too. I usually have better analogies, but you can't have both. You can't have both. You can't have both. If you're against bad repetition, if you're against perverse writing, I can't even spell repetition right now. Repetition. Huh? Yeah. You're against all repetition.
Which is very reminiscent of the connection to the concept of the problem of evil, where the idea is generally the structure of theodicy or justification of evil is you say that evil is innate to human essence in some way. And in this case, it would be that bad repetition, actual occurrences of bad repetition are not contingent. They're necessitated by or involuntary with respect to the essence of writing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there is, so Derrida has some really good pages on Kant about radical evil and the necessity of radical evil and necessity of positing. I said positing, and I like saying positing, but it's wrong. The word is positing. I said it and was corrected in a hilarious scene that I'll explain later. But the necessity of radical evil and the necessity of positing radical evil at the origin, and thus always there in some sense, even in the accomplishment of justice. Yeah, so it's like radical perversion at the origin. That's Derridian sort of, I don't want to say 101, but that's the continual just recourse to continue. It's an argument to which Derrida will continually have recourse for the basic general reason of how do you explain the evil ever arising unless it's at the origin, right? You have two options. You have just a fall, so a random external intervention of sin, or iterability, perversion, whatever, explains nothing, no necessity to it, or you posit it at the origin and draw all the necessary conclusions from it, however uncomfortable they may be.
Which reminds me, I don't know what word is being translated here again, but whenever in previous other texts and translations of Derrida, I've read the word ravish. Like when he says ravish invisibly, that reminds me of this quilting very nicely with the Kant of Exod notion. Because,
Yeah.
like the idea of penetration, perversion, ravishing as being bound up with reason or logos. This is very Desaad coded, I think.
I think that like it can definitely, so yeah, I think I'm totally down to relate it to that. And I think that it's, if you look at the postcard, I won't pull it up right this second because I don't want to open my browser history. No, but I will pull it up right this second. But there's the Plato Socrates postcard Derrida loves is I forget who's on top or who's on bottom, but it's either Plato or Socrates. I think Plato. Yeah, Plato's got to be able to. Yes, so Socrates is on top, but Plato's penetrating. Plato is penetrating Socrates as Socrates writes, and if you Google Plato Socrates postcard Derrida, this will come up. And the penetration is missed. The scroll that's going up doesn't go into Socrates. And I pointed this out to Bennington. Bennington thought this was a really insightful point. And I agree it was. But you put it up, if you put it up and look at it, you can see why Derrida sees this sort of perversion of it. But it's philosophy is always trying to penetrate its other. You have all of these different, Derrida will recall seminar, root word, insemination, right? There's a sort of, and it's when it recalls that, and It doesn't necessarily make one a pervert to look through and notice these structural sort of things. And I think that Sod is a really good place to go, a really interesting place to go. If you're interested in it, Nate Gorlick, who is an old friend of mine, has a great Sod chapter in his new book, The Unwritten Enlightenment. I don't know if I like the title, but I love the chapter on Sod. He has a Sod versus Rousseau chapter where Sod hard wins. And he reads the Lacan with Sod essay. He doesn't, I think, do justice to Lacan's reading in that essay in the sense that I think Lacan dismisses Sod. Lacan concludes Sod doesn't really change anything, that Sod just repeats the law. And I think actually Sod is, and Nate agrees with me that Sod's very disruptive, but Nate kind of grants it to Lacan that maybe he just doesn't have time. He doesn't have time to do everything, do Rousseau versus Sod, and also look into Lacan's reading. But yeah, so I think Sod is a great way to go into this. True. I think this word ravish, we'll have to look it up. I have a sense of what it is. But
I think my question in general in this context, though, because it reminds me of Deleuze's contention with Bataille on the basis of de Sade versus Sacher-Masoch. When you say that philosophy is always penetrating, my question would be like, for us as readers of Derrida's discourse, to whatever extent that it is, or his writing, to what extent or in what respect does Derrida recognize himself as penetrating the other of his writing?
It's a great question.
Because Deleuze's concernism always implies that the position of masochism is reducible to the principle of sadism.
Yeah, so I think the Deleuze position, I think, is really all right. So my brain is trying to compute the Deleuze position in the context of the Derrida versus Lacan. Okay, so there's a Derrida versus Lacan debate on, maybe you're aware, on the Purloined Letter. So it's on this short story. And in this debate, basically, they both try to, basically, the master is the one who is, so the winner of the debate, the master is the one who is most passively able to present themselves to be plucked, as it were. There's a sort of the most mastery is the least mastery, as usual, and reading, thinking about whether the act of reading is active or passive, I would recommend, and comparing the act, and how does the act of reading map onto this sadomasochism? It's a really fucking great question, because if the first line of that Deleuze book is like, what's the point of literature? What's the point of a literary text? And so this question of reading is really bound up to, even in the Deleuzean understanding, right? Deleuze very rarely reflects on what literature is or what reading is, right? That's not really often his concern, in a way that sometimes can feel unfortunate, but he does have a thinking of it there, at least elliptically, and elsewhere. Arguably, Nona has a bunch of Nona and I've been working on this argument about like how difference and repetition is actually all about reading in a certain way. But I would look at this book, Politics of Reading, by my friend Peter Zendi. It's really awesome. And it's all about how in all of these Platonic dialogues, the matrix, it's about the position, for example, of the reader, the one who is made to read out loud for the people at the banquet, at the Platonic banquet. And I think that there's some talk of Sod in there too. Peter is too polite to ever talk about Sod, although it's so funny. I was TAing for Peter, and like the one day he's, David, I actually need you to cover for me, was the Sod day. I was like, it's just okay. I'll just teach philosophy the better. And it was like, I taught this, gosh, I'll talk to you about it off of the video, but it was an incredibly obscene scene he had chosen for me to teach. I just was like, I didn't teach any other days of the class. I taught one other day, but it's just, yeah. But basically, in general, though, the general Derridian relation to activity is going to be activity cancels its own duality, would be the very fast way to put it.
T-side selves. Yeah, go on.
What'd you say? Yeah, it did cite selves. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, activity cancels its own.
How
Or
translate cancels in this context of the German?
it tilt. No, it's. I don't know why. I don't know why I'm not. I don't know why I'm so giggly today, but we're tilted. We're tilted alpha. It's so drillity.
No, I totally understand though. I totally understand, of course, because I agree with that position. Yeah.
Yeah. So like control it. Yeah. So it's not. It's close enough to a sort of just master slave claim, but it's just in the Bataille claim. Just and this also comes in part from Heidegger, like Heidegger wanting to have a reading strategy. Insofar as Heidegger wants to read, it's not always clear Heidegger wants to read. But insofar as Heidegger wants to read, he wants it to be passive, sort of letting what you're reading reveal itself to you. That's that's the most hospitable. So passivity. So in general, you want neither active or passive in the same way you want like neither sophist nor Platonist. But if you had to pick one, and if you, it'd be like a certain passivity is the most open, most hospitable to the event. Right.
God. God, I
Yeah.
that's free.
Okay. If that makes sense. I think it's like I'm really excited. And I know Nona's really excited too for the end here. I've actually never two. Yeah, we have a lot more actually. But we
Yeah, I
have
saw Nietzsche. Oh,
we got Nietzsche, we got magic, we got five here. I forget what is pharmakeia. But I think we will
pharmacist.
pharmakeia. Is it? It could be. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I've got to learn what these.
Socrates in the dialogues of Plato often has the face of a pharmakeus.
Yeah. A sophist, a pharmakeist. In this cut, yeah, this would have to be, as you just said, a pharmacist. Okay. We have 9 more minutes. Let's just read a little more and then we'll stop when we have these 3 pages. We don't have to get through all of them, obviously, but uh, we should really go back and look at some of the. Look at this. It's like a super zoo footnote. Oh my gosh. Okay. I kind of want to just read this footnote. We'll get to it. We'll get to it. We got time. We can make it. We can make it. Okay. Okay. I'll read. Do you see this footnote thing?
Yeah, zoo pharmaceutical. Yeah, anthropos. Yeah,
Zoo pharmaceutical. I fucking love it.
bestiary.
Piece.
I'm a vet. I'm the zoo vet.
Benumbing stingray. Awesome. Okay. I'll read this part from the lysis. Okay. For if there were nothing any more to hurt us, we should have no. I always read it's a Shakespeare play when I'm reading Platonic dialogue. For if there were nothing any more to hurt us, we should have no need whatever of any assistance, unless it would then be made apparent that it was only on account of evil that we felt regard and affection for good, as we consider good to be a medicine for evil and evil to be a disease. But where there is no disease, there is, we are aware, no need of medicine. This, then, it appears is the nature of the good. Yes, he said, that would seem to be true. But if this is the case, what are you talking about, Derrida? It's not, it's hard to figure out exactly what you're to. Okay. But if this is the case, and if Logos is already a penetrating supplement that isn't Socrates, he who does not write, also a master of the Pharmakon. Yes! And in that way, isn't he the spitting image of a sophist, a pharmacus, a magician, a sorcerer, even a poisoner, and even one of those impostors denounced by Gorgias? The threads of these complicities are almost impossible to disentangle. Socrates in the dialogues of Plato often has the face of a pharmacus. I argue like Socrates' ChatGPT article on that coming soon. That is the name given by Diotima to Eros. Behind the portrait of Eros, one cannot fail to recognize the features of Socrates, as through Diotima, in looking at him, or proposing to Socrates the portrait of Socrates. Eros, who is neither rich, nor beautiful, nor delicate, spends his life philosophizing. He is a fearsome sorcerer, magician, and sophist, a being that no logic can confine within a non-contradictory definition. An individual of the demonic species, neither God nor man, neither immortal nor mortal, neither living nor dead. He forms a medium of the prophetic arts, of the priestly rites of sacrifice, initiation, and incantation, of divination and sorcery. In that same dialogue, Agathon accuses Socrates of trying to bewitch him, to cast a spell over him. The portrait of Eros by Diotima is placed between this exclamation and the portrait of Socrates by Alcibiades, who reminds us, okay, I never know if it's like meaning Alcibiades, who reminds us that Socrates' brand of magic is worked through logos without the aid of any instrument, the effects of a voice without accessories, so phono-logocentrism here, without the flute of the satyr Marsyas. And aren't you a piper as well? I should think you were, and a far more wonderful piper than Marsyas, who had only to put his flute to his lips to bewitch mankind. His tunes will still have a magic power, and by virtue of their own divinity, they will show which of us are fit subject for divine initiation. Now, the only difference, Socrates, between you and Marsyas is that you can get just the same effect without any instrument at all, with nothing but a few simple words. When confronted with this simple, organless voice, one cannot escape its penetration by stopping up one's ears. We're going to get back to this at the end of the Plato's Pharmacy, this question of plugging one's ears. What happens when he plugs one's ears? Can Ulysses block out the sirens, sort of things? Like Ulysses trying to block out the sirens. Do you want to finish us off, Hazley?
Happy to, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. The Socratic Pharmakon also acts like venom, like the bite of a poisonous snake. And Socrates' bite is worse than a snake's since its traces invade the soul. What Socrates' words and the viper's venom have in common in any case is their ability to penetrate and make off with the most concealed interiority of the body or soul. The demonic speech of this thaumaturge entrains the listener in Dionysian frenzy and philosophic mania. And when they don't act like the venom of a snake, Socrates' pharmaceutical charms provoke a kind of narcosis, benumbing and paralyzing into aporia, like the touch of a stingray. Socrates, even before I met you, they told me that in plain truth you are a perplexed man yourself and reduce others to perplexity. At this moment, I feel like you are exercising magic and witchcraft upon me and positively laying me under your spell until I am just a mass of helplessness. If I may be flippant, I think that not only in outward appearance, but in other respects as well, you are exactly like the flat stingray that one meets in the sea. Whenever anyone comes into contact with it, it numbs him, and that is the sort of thing that you seem to be doing to me now. My mind and my lips are literally numb, and I have nothing to reply to you. In my opinion, you are well advised not to leave Athens and live abroad. If you behaved like this as a foreigner in another country, you would most likely be arrested as a wizard. Socrates arrested as a wizard, that will have to wait. What can be said about this analogy that ceaselessly refers the Socratic Pharmakon to the Sophistic Pharmakon, and proportioning them to each other makes us go back indefinitely from one to the other? How can they be distinguished? Irony does not consist in the dissolution of a sophistic charm or in the dismantling of an occult substance or power through analysis and questioning. It does not consist in undoing the charlatanesque confidence of a pharmakeus from the vantage point of some obstinate instance of transparent reason or innocent logos. Socratic irony precipitates out one pharmakon by bringing it in contact with another pharmakon. Or rather, it reverses the pharmakon's powers and turns its surface over, thus taking effect being recorded and dated in the act of classing the pharmakon through the fact that the pharmakon properly consists in a certain inconsistency, a certain impropriety, this non-identity with itself always allowing it to be turned against itself. What is at stake in this overturning is no less than science and death, which are consigned to a single type in the structure of the pharmakon, the one and only name for that potion that must be awaited, and even in Socrates' case, deserved.
That's the hemlock. He's gonna die. Socrates was his wizard. That laughing. Anything jump out at you to folks to talk about at all? I think this irony is something I definitely want to say a word about. Maybe might have to wait till next time, but I don't know what this is.
Really, I'm capping it off with science and death because it really fits into, it really makes sense of why, if you didn't know about the Bataille essay, him referencing Bataille in this essay doesn't make any sense, I think. And when he says what is at stake in this overturning is no less than science and death, it makes the name drop of Bataille and Hegelianism make way more sense.
I definitely think in the hypertext of Derrida, if you have Bataille loaded when you're going through this, it really helps. That's why that essay, whenever I'm like, if you want to, my sort of thought of pick 3 essays to learn Derrida, I say this essay, the Bataille Hegel essay, and then signature event context, and then you're pretty much good to go. But Yeah, I like this ending here. I think this, I assume this word is mérité, which definitely deserved as a fine translation, but it's also earned. French, again, only has 5. Okay. And I'm going to have to give myself the treat of reading this footnote. Okay. So we're talking about Socratic irony. So remember, Socratic irony is like, if you ever talk to classicists about it, I think I've done this rip before, but it's like, Socratic irony is like, but what if Socrates is just being ironic? So it doesn't matter. It's a way that it's like a deus ex machina to stop reading that people have when reading. And so Derrida trying to specify what Socratic irony is, very useful sort of thing. Trying to understand and read how Socratic pharmaka work and what the Socratic Pharmakon is a world where we're differentiating and specifying, right? We're not just saying everything's the same. And here this footnote is trying to say, basically saying why Socrates is a zoo sorcerer, a zoo drug dealer, and trying to specify the zoo pharmakiers. Alternatively, and or all at once, describing these two oppositions, right? The Socratic Pharmakon petrifies and vivifies, anesthetizes and sensitizes, appeases and anguishes. Socrates is a benumbing stingray, but also an animal that needles. We recall the bee and the Fido. Later we will open the apology at the point where Socrates compares himself precisely to a gadfly. This whole Socratic configuration thus composes a bestiary. Is it surprising that the demonic inscribes itself in a bestiary? It is on the basis of this zoopharmaceutical ambivalence and of that other Socratic analogy that the contours of the anthropos are determined. Okay, cool. Any other final thoughts? I think that was awesome. Thank you. Thank you for coming, both you. This was really cool. And we made some awesome progress. And we're back on the horse, right? Missed a week, but we're good to go. All right. Word. Okay, bye.